Okay, good morning. Happy almost lunch to everybody. Recognize that being the last people before lunch, we have this kind of weird spot where everybody's like, okay, where's the food? What are they talking about? So we'll try to keep it brief. We'll try to keep it interesting. My name is Stephen Asiala. This is my first NAI meeting, and I'm super excited to be here to talk to you about our presentation topic today, the University of Notre Dame's transition from a traditional tech transfer operation to a university startup studio. As my colleague Ben Hogan, he's going to introduce himself later. He's director of something in our organization. We'll figure that out at some point. But we're going to share this presentation. I'll kind of set the table for this talk today and kind of motivate everything. And then Ben's going to talk about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, and whether or not we think it's working thus far. Right. So just as an overview of the talk, I'm going to talk about the growth of research at the University of Notre Dame, and specifically our tech transfer operations up to the start of the Idea Center. I'm going to tell a personal story of my experience as an inventor, as a graduate student at the University of Notre Dame. And we're also going to talk about some industry trends. Then Ben's going to talk about the Idea Center, as I said before, and how's it going, right? So people know Notre Dame for a number of reasons, beating Purdue in football, the movie Rudy. Sorry, that was a shout at our Purdue presenters from earlier. The movie Rudy, and really good undergraduate institution. People don't often think of Notre Dame's history and innovation, but you'll know that synthetic rubber, neoprene, which is eventually developed by DuPont, was initially discovered and patented from Professor Neuland from the University of Notre Dame, way back. But about 17 years ago, when Father John Jenkins was installed as a new president at the University of Notre Dame, he made a bold statement that they want to make Notre Dame a preeminent research institution, not just a primarily undergraduate institution as it had been historically, but being a world player in this research space as well. So this has led to significant investment in recruiting faculty at all stages, so associate, assistant, full professor, and as well as senior leadership within the university. President Greg Crawford, who's part of Miami University now and is speaking at a panel tomorrow, was actually the dean of the College of Science when I was a graduate student there. So bringing in people who are innovators and researchers to be senior leaders at the university as well. Investment in buildings, institutes, centers, and core facilities to support those endowed institutes and centers, which are building on areas of strength for Notre Dame research as well. And so far, it's been pretty successful. There's been growth in research expenditures over the past 10 years, effectively doubling the research expenditures from the university from $109 million in 2012 to $227 million in the past year, and that's down from $240 million in 2020. But with all of this growth, we largely had a status quo tech transfer operation, starting in 2008 with our first director of technology transfer, through the time of the launch of the Idea Center in 2017. There were a few programs around entrepreneurship and student entrepreneurship development and a STEAM program, which is an engineering, science, technology. What's the acronym, Ben? Remind me, you're the graduate of the program.
Engineering, Science, and Technology Entrepreneurial Excellence Masters.
A master's degree in entrepreneurship, right? So there were some things that were starting to happen around tech commercialization and that sort of thing. But for the most part, our tech transfer operations looked something like this. This is a diagram that's probably familiar to a lot of you who have tried to commercialize technologies emanating from university research. It all starts with primary research. Someone in the course of answering a research question discovers, invents, creates something novel that's useful and could be commercializable. They formally tell their tech transfer office about that through the process of disclosure. There's an evaluation of some description by the tech commercialization manager. The IP team looks at the prospects of protection. There's a marketing campaign. You identify who are the potential customers here. They would be interested in licensing this technology. You begin negotiations, and if all goes well, eventually you get to the point where you execute a license, returning revenues back to the university so you can do more research and wash, rinse, repeat here, right? So each of these steps in this process has a specific probability of succeeding, but also has a probability of not succeeding. And when it doesn't succeed, you end up with three things that, as a person who thinks about faculty engagement and faculty's willingness to participate in these sorts of activities, are all not great outcomes, right? So the first is diminished impact. The work that researchers do has impact in a number of different ways, commercialization being a key one in a lot of areas. So diminished impact is definitely a negative outcome here. Shelved technologies where there's been full patent execution that are not where we invested the money to get a patent on something, but it's not being executed on, right? It's not being commercialized to any extent at all. What is the point of that? Right? And then finally, disappointed faculty and inventors. As a person, as I said before, who thinks a lot about how we do a better job of engaging with our faculty and with our researchers, with our postdocs, with our graduate students, if they're not having a positive experience in this process, they're less likely to repeat that experience into the future. So I'm going to tell you a personal story, as I said before, about my experience as a graduate student. So there's a number of images here. I'm going to nerd out just a little bit and talk a little bit about my graduate research. I was working in a niche area of analytical chemistry called surface-enhanced Raman spectroscopy. Raman spectroscopy is this analytical technique where you shine a laser at a molecule. It does this, and you can figure out what the molecule is based on how it vibrates, right? Scattering of photons. It's notoriously really, really insensitive. We found a way to make it really, really sensitive, right? So we make a metal-structured surface. We put molecules on that surface. We shine a laser on it the same way we would if they were just molecules. They experience an enhanced electromagnetic field. They wiggle even more, and you get better detection, right? 8 orders of magnitude improvement on the number of counts per signal per molecule, right? So we thought that this could be really transformative, right? Taking this really non-sensitive technique to the level of potentially a single molecule sensitivity for specific molecules. And that's what's being shown in the center panel here. Good news too, it's really uniform across the surface. I was pretty excited about this. I was really excited about this research for a long time. So we started with the research. We disclosed this to the tech transfer office at the university at the time. Our TCM performs an evaluation and says, hey, there might be something here. IP looks good. We make a provisional filing. Marketing, identify 3 or 4 companies to reach out to. One of them bites. We get into an option conversation, and then it falls through, and the provisional is never converted to a full patent. Okay, fine. That happens, understood. Not everything's a winner. Awesome. Fast forward 3 or 4 years later, I'm a postdoc working in another lab in the UK, and we get sent these samples on the left, which are effectively the same thing that I had invented about 5 or 6 years earlier, made of the same material, really similar structure. If you squint, you can see the SEM here is really similar. You go online now, there are this many companies who are either making or selling products that are similar to this, these same sorts of substrates that we had filed provisional patent on. And this is my reaction, like, why is this not a thing? Not to line my own pocketbooks, but maximizing impact, right? That's the key thing that we're interested in as the Idea Center and as a tech transfer office in general. So the last thing I'm going to talk about before I hand over to Ben here are some other relevant trends outside of my own personal experience and my own story on why we're kind of shifting our model from that traditional tech transfer model that I showed you 2 slides ago to something that maybe leverages startup opportunities a bit more. So I'm sharing some data from Autumn here. I know there are some members of Autumn here in the audience. I hope I'm not misrepresenting anything. If I am, take it up with me later. I maybe used last year's numbers. Apologies. So licensing revenue has fallen about 15%. So total licensing across all tech transfer offices for all technologies since 2008 has fallen about 15%. Less than 13% of technology transfer offices are self-sustaining. I don't see this as a problem, but some university administrators may see this as a problem. I see tech transfer as a thing that costs money and doesn't lose money. It's like the post office in that way. But that might not be everybody's view, right? 80% of revenues go to 10% of the top TTOs. And there are some other industry trends around outsourcing of research, the propensity to buy technologies or buy startups out versus fund R&D. And then also looking at the changing landscape of university industry partnerships and a bit of uncertainty in those areas. So the question is, can we build, develop, and nurture a process that does the work of a common tech transfer office in the university segment here to add value, but then also on top of that does some of the work in the startup space to really accelerate and add further value to these organizations or to these technologies through startup organizations. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Ben here, and he's going to walk you through what the Idea Center does, what our model is, how we operate, and what's happening in South Bend.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I'm Ben Hogan. I'm the Director of De-risking and Commercialization for the Idea Center. So I run about half of the commercialization team. And I'm really excited to talk to you about kind of the different structure of this grand experiment that we've created on how can we maximize the impact of our faculty's research, faculty inventions in the world rather than keeping them inside the university. So following all those trends, our senior leadership at the university got together and formed kind of the basis, the idea for the Idea Center. And in 2017, we launched. So what is the Idea Center? It stands for Innovation, De-risking, Enterprise Acceleration. And really what we are is the central hub for everything having to do with entrepreneurship and commercialization with the university. So we have a whole bunch of different parts of the Idea Center, aside from just the commercialization team. We brought our student entrepreneurship group into our organization. We have a space, about a 90,000 square foot space that we use to house our startups and our organization. We have our business plan, the McCloskey Business Plan Competition, which is one of the bigger competitions in the nation.
I think it's number 2, right? Was that last year's rankings? They were number 2 in the country?
I don't know.
I think, something like that. I want to give Patty your props. Patty, who runs that program, is always very proud to announce, we're number 2 this year. We're only 1 away from the top one. So.
We have the Esteemed Masters program that I'm an alumni of that focuses on technology, commercialization, and innovation and entrepreneurship. And then we also have our commercialization team, which is set up very different than a lot of other tech transfer offices. So when I first came on, my first title was Technology Commercialization Manager, but I came on right in the middle of this transition from traditional tech transfer office to kind of the startup studio model. So what is the startup studio model? Kind of in a nutshell, a startup studio is an organization that will create new startup companies. So we, in our organization, will do all of the work of kind of the founders in order to get it to the place where a company is formed, people are involved, it has funding, and it can be self-sustaining. So we have a few things that we think set ourselves apart and give us some advantages. Number one is we focus on process. So the commercialization engine, the commercialization team that we're talking about, we have a pretty rigorous stage-gated process that will put each technology through, each disclosure, that it will get vetted and assessed and prioritized depending on what we think the impact could be both in the market and in the world. Notre Dame has a really exceptional alumni network, and we use it to provide mentorship, expertise, management, governance to our companies, and we utilize them in our funding network as well. We're very focused on startups. We will still do licenses when it's appropriate, if it's an add-on technology or something like that. But we are here to start new startup companies. And this is the modern driver of royalties coming from IP from universities. Like I said, we have all of the different kind of pieces of entrepreneurship housed under one roof. We've got a lot of education. We have a minor program. And finally, we have our own internal venture capital studio. So this is a true ROI-driven venture capital fund where we, as the Idea Center, act as are the general partners. So a lot of other universities have funds that they're associated with or buckets of funding that they can allocate into their startups. But this venture capital fund has really been a differentiator for us because it signals differently to other investors and allows us to get other investment into our startups easier than it was in the past. So we have our vision, what we're working towards. We want to be the world leader for an impactful and inclusive economic transformation through innovative, mission-driven commercialization, entrepreneurship, and education. And so in order to do that, we are focusing on our process that creates venture-worthy companies. We have an obligation for return on investment to our university. We are fortunate to be in an area that's in the middle of kind of an economic turnaround, and we are contributing to that very significantly. And if this grand experiment that we're running, if this different model, which we think we're having some success with, works, then we want to be able to have this replicated in other places across the country and across the world. And we've done some work to make that possible. So Steve gave you the commercialization process in a traditional tech transfer office. This is kind of what ours looks like now. We have still invention disclosures, but then we put it through 3 phases. We call them risk assessment, de-risking, and enterprise acceleration. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about each one of those right now. So risk assessment is really like our first prioritization of different technologies as they come in. It can be really challenging to understand what the invention is and what's different about it. How is it new and differentiated from other research and other technologies that are maybe on the market or in other places? And so this is our first pass at how do we really get our whole commercialization team on board, understanding what the technology is, and how do we make good decisions around it. So we work with a lot of student analysts that come from the colleges of science, engineering, and the MBA program. And we're going to go through each of these different kind of risk categories, and we build a whole report that kind of culminates in this one slide that you see in front of us, where we can get a kind of a big picture assessment of the risks of the technology as it stands today. So we're going to look at things like, are there competitors in the market, and what is the size of the market? Is this a big enough opportunity for us to really tackle right now, or is this something that we should deprioritize? Is it protectable? I said we have all of the different pieces of commercialization. I sit right next door to our director of licensing and intellectual property. And so we act as this very cross-functional team that is focused on skills expertise rather than area expertise. So we're going to look at all of these different pieces, all of these different risks, and say, what should we do with this? We can decide not to pursue it any further. We can say, hey, maybe this is a licensing opportunity. Or what we're really focused on is what are the companies or what are the technologies that could become a new startup company. So if it goes down the startup path, then it moves into our second phase, which we call de-risking. So what is de-risking? We've identified the most critical risks associated with the company or the technology. And now what we're going to do is we're going to collect data to mitigate those risks. And we're going to do that with increasing levels of confidence. So in other words, we're going to apply the scientific process, the scientific method, to business hypotheses. And so the reason that we focus so much on de-risking, and this is where the vast majority of our effort at the Idea Center ends up being, is in this de-risking process, is this allows us to really understand the risks that are associated. It's going to help us really understand and save time, money, and effort by focusing on the technologies, the innovations that have the highest chance of success in the marketplace and the highest kind of feedback from customers and other people. So we do this for ourselves so that we're not spending money on things that we could really deprioritize quickly. We do it for our investors so that they are not spending money on something that was never going to create a return on their investment in the first place. And we do it for our faculty as well as a service to them. So I said de-risking, we're collecting data. What kind of data are we collecting? These are kind of the 4 fundamental questions that we start answering. And so we look at what is the problem that we're solving and for who? Will my customer love using the product? Does anybody want to buy it? If so, who are they and how much are they willing to pay? And does it work enough for what the market needs, right? And so I focus as the director of de-risking on the first 3 questions, and we go pretty deep on those. And then I have a counterpart who focuses on technical de-risking and answers that 4th question, does it work? So how do we do this? Well, we have a bunch of different kind of tools and techniques that we've pulled from different places. I did NSF I-Corps instructor training, so I can do that. But we've also taken a lot of different programs and techniques from human insights industries, customer insights industries, and other tools and techniques that are commonly used in lean startup methodology, and we're applying them here. Some of these are very industry focused, like value analysis cases or medical economic outcome cases are very frequent if you're doing anything inside of a hospital organization, but a lot of them can be applied to any different types of technology. So we'll do lots and lots of different customer and expert interviews. I think my team has done somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 customer interviews over the last five or 6 years, something like that. So we very highly value and need the input from our customers in order to understand the value of the technology, what it needs to do, what it needs to perform, what it needs to look like and feel like. So we're going to take all these techniques, we're going to apply the ones that are appropriate, and we're going to collect data to convince ourselves that there's a real need here. There's a problem to be solved, that there's a customer on the other side. And at some point in that process, that de-risking process, we can kind of convince ourselves, and we can maybe start to convince a few other people that it's time to start a company. And so at that point, this is where a lot of the studio services come in. We create Notre Dame wholly owned companies and incubate them internally until they're ready to take funding and then be spun out of the university. So we work with exterior entrepreneurs. We'll try and recruit entrepreneurs. We also have built what we call the Startup Associate Program, where we're taking more mature and sophisticated MBA students and other master's students and training them and teaching them to be the first CEO of the company. So we help them set customer and product milestones together. They're going to work with the faculty team. They're going to interact with industry. They're going to interact with customers. And we're going to see, can we get our first pilot customer? Can we get 15 pilot testers or something like that, so that we can have this data set to rely on to go to our investors and say, there's really something here. We're going to recruit the management. And in addition to that, we're going to put together a board of directors for each company before it leaves our organization. We're usually pulling that from our Alumni Network. We do a lot of entrepreneur coaching and training. So the Startup Associate Program that we have has a lot of different mentors that come in and help talk about different things that they're talented at or their experiences. We have a lot of training that we've developed on how to do and understand different pieces of early stage entrepreneurship, like what is a cap table and what is a safe note. These can be really, really helpful for early stage entrepreneurs. And then finally, we'll do the kind of legal and administrative work of company formation. We do cap table management and negotiation, and the agreements are all inside of our organization as well. So after all of these kind of pieces are in place, we've got funding into the company, we've got a management team, we've got a board. Hopefully we've housed them inside of our innovation park space. Then they're ready to spin out and be their own entity, to be their own company. And so, the kind of hypothesis, the fundamental thing that we're trying to do is increase the success rate of our startups so that we can avoid building things that people don't need, people don't want. So how are we doing? I think we're doing pretty okay. We've been around for about 4.5 years. We had a company raise the largest Series A in Indiana's history. We've gone through well over 170 faculty disclosures, which is a lot for our little school. We've had 1,000 students or more submit ideas and gotten feedback and input and help and training. We've formed 143 startups in that time period, and 50 of those have received enough funding to go full-time on the venture. We've had $54 million of investment into our startups in the last 12 months, created 153 jobs at an $80,000 a year average salary, which in South Bend, Indiana is very good. Might not sound like a lot to people from the coasts, but that's really good in South Bend, Indiana.
Move to the Midwest.
We've closed and deployed our venture capital fund, $23 million ROI fund. And the best kind of indicator I can give you of the success of that is the TVPI, total value paid in, or kind of it's a multiplier. How much is the capital worth now? Is at 2, which is really good for a really early stage fund like this. We've got 100,000 people or more in 16,000 different companies that are all part of the Idea Center network, not just Notre Dame alums. We have an advisory council and a venture builder committee that give us regular feedback and input and help in building and governing our startups. And we've finished our second building for Innovation Park, and we have plans for 3 more buildings here in the next few years to help expand our operation and organization. So really happy to be here. Thanks so much. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Very, very interesting model. One of the concerns of innovators often is the pound of flesh you lose to venture, the equity question. And so, we've just heard the SBIR program, which is a non-dilutional program. What's the pound of flesh?
Yeah, what's the pound of flesh? So what are we taking? So we allow our faculty to choose kind of a pathway through our organization. If they want to start the company themselves and do all of the work, they're more than welcome to do that, and they can own, effectively 97% of the company. But we feel like our services increase the likelihood of success for the startup very significantly, and so we end up taking about 20% of the company.
What else? Oh, see, we got one more coming here.
Great presentation. I had a question. You showed students. The question I have is IP, is it owned by the students, especially undergrad students? Or if not, what happens during that process?
Yeah, so if it's a Ph.D. student working on their area of research, that's going to be owned by the university, but anything else, we don't want to touch it. It's
only dealing with PhDs and postdocs and things like that.
So we do a lot with undergraduate students and MBAs and kind of the other schools as well.
But can they go into your into those buildings and do the startup?
Yes, they can.
So then all you're doing is taking an equity position against the company.
We're only going to take an equity position if we're doing this work for them.
Okay.
Or with them.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.